I wasn't even wanted. You were a mistake, a failed abortion I was forced to keep. There it is. Those are the words my own mother said to me. 15 years of life, and my entire existence was summed up in 2 words: mistake, failure. The moment those words left her lips, the air in the room turned thick and heavy. A dull ringing started in my ears, and the floral pattern on the wallpaper behind her suddenly began to swim. I saw my dad's face go from flushed with anger to ghost white. But my mom's face, it wasn't triumphant, not even angry. It was just empty. A cold, exhausted emptiness, like she'd finally put down a burden she'd been carrying for far too long. Those words were like a crack of lightning that didn't just strike the present. It illuminated my entire past in one painful flash. All the confusing moments, the little paper cuts of neglect I'd collected over the years. Suddenly, they weren't random anymore. They were a pattern, a roadmap leading straight to this moment, in this cold living room. My mind immediately flashed to all the dinners, 1,000 of them, all playing out the exact same way. I could smell the roast chicken with herbs, see the golden brown skin of the buttery garlic potatoes. The smell of family, just not my family. My little sister Chloe would be chirping about a drawing she made in school. My mom Sarah would listen with a beaming smile, her eyes sparkling in the warm light. "Oh, honey, you're a real artist," she'd gush, promising to frame it and hang it in the kitchen. My brother Leo would be complaining about losing a video game, and my mom would playfully ruffle his hair. I'd be sitting there, right in the middle of them, but completely outside their warm circle. I'd think about telling them I aced my math test, but the words would just die in my throat, swallowed by their laughter. My mother's hands would dance across the table, a ballet of affection. She'd scoop a generous helping of potatoes onto Chloe's plate, carefully avoiding the burnt bits. She'd carve a huge piece of chicken breast for Leo, because my growing boy needs his protein. And then her hands would just glide past the empty space in front of me, without a flicker of hesitation. My dad would catch my eye from the head of the table, giving me that silent, familiar nod. It meant, "I know, I'm sorry." Quietly, I'd get up. My chair scraping against the hardwood floor sounded like a gunshot in my own head, but to them, it was complete silence. I'd open the cabinet and get my own cold ceramic plate. The clink of my fork against it was the only sound I ever contributed to dinner. It was a familiar dance, a silent play I had performed 1,000 times. Then another memory, sharper this time. The art show incident, back when I was 10. I'd spent a whole week painting that dragon. I remembered the sharp smell of the tempera paint, the feeling of pride swelling in my chest when my teacher hung it up. The school gymnasium was hot and loud, but I didn't care. I tugged on my mom's sleeve, my heart hammering against my ribs, and pointed to my masterpiece, a dragon with 5 legs under a green sky. "What do you think, Mom?" I asked. She glanced at it. I could see her eyes glaze over in less than 3 seconds. I could literally see the reflection of her phone's screen in her pupils. "Yeah, it's nice, honey," she said, her voice flat, before walking away. A moment later, I heard her gasp with delight, pulling my dad over to look at some other kid's painting of a sunflower. She went on and on about the colors, the brushstrokes. I just stood there, frozen. It felt like someone had dumped a bucket of ice water over me. Then a big, warm hand landed on my shoulder. "Dad." He leaned down and whispered in my ear, "Don't let it get to you, champ. I think your dragon is the coolest thing here. By far." His words were a life raft, but they couldn't stop the feeling that I was sinking. And that coldness, it was like a family trait. I remember my 12th birthday. My Aunt Karen got Leo a massive Lego Star Wars set, and Chloe an expensive doll. I got a book on corporate tax law. "You're the smart one," she'd said with a shrug. "Thought you might find it interesting." Sometimes at night, I'd press my ear against the cold wood of my parents' bedroom door. I couldn't make out the words, just the music of it. My father's tired, pleading rhythm, and my mother's flat, defensive tone. I'd only ever catch snippets. Dad's voice. "You can't keep treating him like this, Sarah." And Mom's exhausted. "I've tried, David. You know I've tried." Now I get it. She'd been trying to live with her mistake. I had gotten used to being an unsolved equation in my own home, a flawed problem no one wanted to bother solving. Those whispered arguments got louder over the years, like thunder rumbling in the distance, getting closer. I felt a storm that had been brewing inside these walls for years was about to break. I just never guessed that I was the storm. And that night, it finally made landfall. The silence in my house was finally broken, not by whispers, but by the sharp, explosive sound of glass shattering against a wall. I was upstairs, trying to force my brain to focus on an algebra equation that suddenly felt like the most meaningless thing in the universe. The muffled sounds of arguing had been a low hum in the background for an hour, the usual soundtrack to our evenings. But this was different. This was a sound of something giving way, something final. My pencil froze over the paper. Every muscle in my body went tight. I pushed my chair back, the legs scraping quietly against the floor, and moved into the hallway. The voices were clearer now. My dad's, tight and strained. My mom's, sharp and brittle. I crept to the top of the stairs, my heart hammering a nervous rhythm against my ribs. They were in the living room. Peeking around the corner, I could see the scene laid out like a car wreck. My dad stood by the fireplace, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. My mom was on the other side of the room, near the entryway, her arms crossed tight against her chest. And on the floor between them, a spray of green shards and fallen flowers lay in a puddle of water. Mom's favorite vase. "I cannot keep living like this, Sarah," my dad was saying, his voice cracking. "Living paycheck to paycheck, watching you spend money we don't have on things we don't need." "Oh, so this is about money now?" she shot back, her voice dripping with scorn. "This is my fault? I'm the one trying to make this house feel like a home, not a prison." "A home?" he laughed, a bitter, ugly sound. "A home is about the people in it, not the junk you fill it with. It's about being a family." "Don't you dare lecture me about family, David," she hissed. And that's when she saw me, a shadow at the top of the stairs. Her eyes narrowed, and her anger, like a heat-seeking missile, found a new target. She pointed a trembling finger, not at my dad, but right at me. This is what it's always been about. All of this started with him." The air left my lungs. My dad turned, his face a mask of confusion and horror. "Sarah, don't you bring him into this." But it was too late. I was already in it. I had been my whole life. I felt my feet moving before my brain gave them permission, carrying me down the stairs, one slow, deliberate step at a time. The years of confusion, of feeling like a ghost, of asking myself a million times what I did wrong, it all coalesced into a single, burning point inside my chest. I reached the bottom step. My voice, when it came out, was a raw, shaking whisper I barely recognized. "Why?" I asked, my eyes locked on hers. "Just tell me why. Why have you never loved me?" The question hung in the air, heavier than the silence that followed. The whole world seemed to stop. My dad looked like he wanted to speak, to stop what was coming, but he was frozen. My mom just stared at me. Her anger seemed to drain away, replaced by something far colder, far more terrifying. It was a look of finality. A dry, humorless laugh escaped her lips. "Love you?" she said, the words sharp as broken glass. "I wasn't even supposed to have you." She took a step closer, her voice dropping to a low, venomous confession that was meant only for me. "You were a mistake, a failed abortion I was forced to keep." And there it was, the truth, the secret ingredient to every silent dinner, every ignored painting, every cold shoulder. The world didn't just go silent, it went completely out of focus. The ringing in my ears was deafening. My mother's face, my father's horrified expression, the shattered vase on the floor, it all blurred into a meaningless watercolor painting. I felt a strange sense of detachment, like I was floating above my own body, watching this pathetic kid get his heart ripped out. Then, the world came crashing back in a wave of sound. It was my dad, roaring. "Sarah!" The name was a raw, guttural sound of pure rage. He crossed the room in 2 strides, not stopping until he was standing between me and her, a human shield. "What the hell is wrong with you? What the hell did you just say to him?" He turned to me then, his eyes wild with a mix of fury and a desperate, heartbreaking pain. "Go to your room, son," he ordered, his voice thick. "Go, now." I didn't need to be told twice. I turned and walked, my legs feeling like they were made of lead. Each step up the stairs was a monumental effort. The house felt alien now, the walls hostile. I didn't look back. I closed my bedroom door behind me, the soft click echoing in the sudden silence. I didn't cry. I didn't punch a wall. I just slid down the door until I was sitting on the floor, my arms wrapped around my knees. I stared at the poster on my wall, a picture of a band I thought I loved, but I couldn't remember their name. I couldn't remember anything before the last 5 minutes. The shock was a blanket, smothering every other feeling. I was hollowed out, a shell. The boy who had walked down those stairs 15 minutes ago was gone, and I didn't know who this new person was, sitting alone in the dark. The next few days passed in a fog. The house was quieter than it had ever been. It was an oppressive silence, heavy with unspoken words and shattered trust. Then, they called all 3 of us into the living room. My aunt was there, standing next to my mom. My siblings sat on the couch, looking scared and confused. I sat in the armchair, feeling nothing. My dad cleared his throat. He looked a decade older. "Kids," he started, "your mother and we've decided that it's best if we get a divorce." I watched as Chloe's face crumpled and she burst into tears. Leo stared at the floor, his jaw tight, trying to be strong, but his eyes were glassy. My aunt immediately went to comfort my mom, who was dabbing at her eyes with a tissue, and I just sat there, numb. The word divorce should have felt like a punch to the gut. It should have been the worst news of my life. But after the bomb that had already gone off inside me, it was just a whisper in the fallout. It was the aftershock, not the earthquake. The world had already ended. This was just the paperwork. Through the fog of my own numbness, I heard my aunt's voice. It was brisk, efficient, like a general taking command of a battlefield. "All right, kids," she said, clapping her hands together softly. "Let's get you packed up. You'll all be staying with me and your mom for a while." Her words cut through the haze. I watched as she started to herd my crying siblings, trying to get them moving. The idea of it, leaving this house, leaving my dad, and going to live under the same roof as that woman and her chief defender, was so repulsive, so fundamentally wrong, that it sparked something in my hollowed-out chest. A single, defiant ember. No. The word was quiet, almost a whisper. But in the hushed, grief-stricken room, it sounded like a gunshot. Everyone froze. My aunt turned to me, her face a mask of disbelief. Chloe and Leo stopped crying and just stared, their eyes wide. I saw a flicker of something, pain, maybe regret, on my mother's face before she looked away. My dad just looked tired, but a hint of surprise registered in his eyes. Aunt Karen plastered on a strained, patient smile. "Honey, this is a hard time. We all need to stick together. Your mother needs you right now." "I'm not going," I said again, my voice stronger this time. I stood up from the armchair, my gaze fixed on my mother. "I'm staying here." Without another word, I turned and walked out of the living room, leaving a stunned silence in my wake. I made it to my room and had just closed the door when it was thrown open again, hard enough to bang against the wall. It was my aunt. Her face was no longer patient. It was flushed with anger. She slammed the door shut behind her. "What do you think you're doing?" she demanded, her voice a low hiss. "Your mother is falling apart and you pull a stunt like that? Your brother and sister look up to you. You're the oldest. You're supposed to be the strong one for them." I just laughed, a cold, empty sound. "The strong one? You mean the third parent? I'm done. I don't owe that woman anything." The words "that woman" made her recoil as if I'd slapped her. "How dare you?" she seethed. "How dare you talk about your mother that way? You have no idea what she's been through. You have no idea what's really going on." "Oh, so why don't you enlighten me, Aunt Karen?" I shot back, the anger finally starting to bubble up through the numbness. She looked at me, her eyes glinting with a cruel sort of righteousness. She thought she had a trump card, a weapon that would end this rebellion for good. Your father cheated, she said, her voice dropping dramatically. He had an affair. He broke your mother's heart, destroyed this family, and you're choosing to side with him? The words hung in the air, meant to be a kill shot. And the strangest part? I felt almost nothing. The news registered somewhere in the back of my mind as a distant, abstract fact. It was like someone telling me about a fender bender on the other side of the country. How could I care about a crack in the foundation when the whole house had already been leveled by a bomb? I met her triumphant gaze with a dead stare of my own. So what? The look on her face, the utter shock and confusion, was almost satisfying. So what? She sputtered. He's a cheater, a liar, and she's a saint? I yelled, finally losing control. You want me to support my mother? Why? Why would I support someone who looked me in the eye and told me I was a failed abortion she never wanted? Why would I go live with a woman who spent 15 years making sure I knew I was a mistake? Who couldn't even be bothered to put a plate on the table for me? Who left me out of the family Christmas card? I was advancing on her now, all the pain and rage from a lifetime of being invisible pouring out of me. You want to talk about who destroyed this family? She did. She destroyed it for me long before my dad ever did whatever he did. So why don't you go and comfort your perfect sister and leave me the hell alone? We were both breathing heavily, the air in my small room crackling with hatred. My aunt looked pale, speechless for the first time. The door creaked open. It was my dad, his face etched with pain from having heard everything. My mom was right behind him. Karen, my dad said, his voice dangerously calm. Get out of his room, now. He stepped aside to let her pass. She shot me one last venomous look before storming out. My dad looked at me, his eyes full of 1,000 things he couldn't say. Then he pulled the door almost closed, leaving me alone. My mother just stood there for a second, a silhouette in the hallway. Her face was unreadable. Then she too was gone. I was left alone in the vibrating silence, my body shaking with leftover adrenaline. I had done it. I had said it all. I had used the ugliest truth as a weapon, and I had won. But it didn't feel like a victory. It felt hollow. Then I heard it. A small, trembling voice from the hallway, just outside my door. It was Chloe. Mommy? She asked, her voice cracking with tears. What's an abortion? Did you try to kill him? And in that moment, any anger I felt was washed away by a cold, crushing wave of guilt. I had fought my war, spoken my truth. But in the smoke and chaos, I never realized my little sister was standing right on the battlefield. The guilt from my fight with my aunt felt like a physical weight. I spent the next day at school in a complete haze, the teacher's voice nothing more than a dull drone in the background. My mind was a chaotic storm of my mother's words and my sister's horrified question. I couldn't focus. I couldn't think. I felt like I was drowning, and every time I came up for air, the waves just crashed over me again. Halfway through third period, my phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a text from my dad. I'm outside. Let's get out of here. I mumbled an excuse to my teacher about feeling sick, which was not entirely a lie, and walked out into the bright, indifferent sunlight. He was leaning against his car, looking tired. He didn't look at me with pity, just a quiet, weary understanding. We drove in silence for a while, the car a bubble of unspoken tension moving through the normal, bustling city. He didn't drive home. Instead, he pulled into the parking lot of an old Greasy Spoon diner a few towns over. One of those places with cracked red vinyl booths and the smell of stale coffee permanently baked into the walls. We slid into a booth by the window. A waitress came over, poured us 2 coffees without asking, and left. The silence stretched, thick and awkward. I just stared into the black liquid in my mug, watching the steam rise. He was the one who finally broke it. I'm sorry, he said, his voice low and raspy. I am so sorry you had to find out about the affair that way. I just shrugged, not looking up. It's not an excuse, he continued, his words slow and measured, like he'd rehearsed them 1,000 times in his head. Nothing is an excuse for what I did. I was drained. Your mother and we'd been disconnected for years, and I felt lost. I made a selfish, terrible decision that hurt everyone. It went on for about 5 months. It ended because I ended it. I couldn't live with the person I was becoming. I couldn't come home and look you kids in the eye. She's gone. She's not going to be a part of our lives. I'm not planning on dating anyone until all of you are grown and out of the house. You kids are my only priority. I needed you to hear that from me." He finished, and the silence returned. He had just confessed this huge betrayal, and I knew I was supposed to feel something: anger, disappointment, disgust. But it all felt so distant, so secondary to the real wound. I finally looked up from my coffee and met his eyes. "What about before that?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "Back at the beginning, when Mom got pregnant with me. What part did you play in that?" He sighed, a long, heavy breath that seemed to carry the weight of 2 decades. He leaned back in the booth, his eyes looking out the window but seeing something far in the past. "I wish I could tell you I was there for her, that I was a knight in shining armor," he said. "But the truth is, I didn't even know you existed until about 2 weeks before you were born." I just stared, confused. "Your mother and I," he began, "we were just kids, 16. We weren't serious, not really. Just a dumb high school thing. When she found out she was pregnant, she didn't tell me. She was terrified. She only told her sister, your Aunt Karen." He took a sip of his coffee, his knuckles white around the mug. "Now, you've never really known your mother's parents. There's a reason for that. They are intense, very strict, very religious. To them, appearances are everything. A pregnant teenage daughter was not just a disappointment. It was a catastrophic shame they couldn't bear." He described what happened next, painting a picture so bleak it felt like something out of a movie. My mom, a scared 16-year-old, and my aunt, barely older, panicking. Karen had managed to find a clinic, to scrape together some money to help my mom get an abortion. But their parents found out. All hell broke loose. They screamed at my mother, called her a sinner, a disgrace. They locked her down, watched her every move, forbidding her from what they called compounding her sin. "But Karen, she's always been a fighter," my dad continued, a flicker of old admiration in his eyes. "She tried to help your mom again, a second time, to get it done somehow. But her parents found that out too, and they weren't taking any more chances. To separate them, to make sure your mother couldn't escape, they sent Karen away. Shipped her off to live with some distant relatives in another state until after you were born. Your mother was completely alone with them, a prisoner in her own home, for the rest of her pregnancy." He paused, letting the weight of it all sink in. A scared, pregnant teenager, abandoned by her scared boyfriend, her only ally exiled, trapped in a house with parents who looked at her with nothing but shame. It was only when she was nearly full term, when she couldn't hide it anymore, that one of her friends finally called me and told me what was going on. I was a stupid, scared 17-year-old kid, but the moment I heard, I drove to her house. I fought with her parents. I told them I would be there for her and for you. It was a mess, but by then it was too late to do anything. 2 weeks later, you were born." He finally turned from the window and looked at me, his eyes filled with a profound sadness. "I'm not telling you this to excuse her, son. Nothing. Nothing can ever excuse the way she treated you. The pain she caused you is real. But I wanted you to know. The person who hurt you was once a kid who was hurt very, very badly herself. I think every time she looked at you, she didn't just see her son. She saw the cage she was kept in for 9 months. She saw her parents' disappointment. She saw the life she lost. And that's a heavy thing to put on a child. It's not fair, and it's not right, but it's the truth." We sat there in silence as the waitress came and refilled our coffees. So I wasn't a failed abortion. I was a prevented one. A subtle difference in words, maybe, but it felt like the world had tilted on its axis. My mother wasn't a monster. She was a traumatized teenager who grew into a broken adult, and she'd been taking it out on me my entire life. "My biggest regret," my dad said, his voice thick with emotion, finally breaking the silence. "My biggest regret isn't the affair. It's that I spent 15 years watching you get hit by the shrapnel from a bomb that went off before you were even born. And I didn't know how to stop it. I should have protected you better. I should have fought harder for you. And for that, I will be sorry for the rest of my life. The ride home was quiet, but it was a different kind of quiet. It wasn't tense or awkward. It was heavy, somber, full of a new, complicated grief. I had answers now, more answers than I had ever expected. But they didn't bring peace. They just brought more questions. For the first time, I didn't just see my mother, the woman who hurt me. I saw a scared 16-year-old girl trapped in a nightmare. And I had no idea what to do with that girl. No idea at all. The weekend at my paternal grandparents' house was like entering a different dimension. Here the air wasn't thick with tension. It was filled with the smell of my grandma's baking, and the sound of my grandpa's old records playing softly in the background. It was a world where love was simple, and plates were always set at the table. On Saturday afternoon, while my brother was glued to a video game, I was sitting on the living room floor with Chloe, helping her build a ridiculously tall Lego tower. She was quiet for a long time, carefully placing one brick on top of another. Then, without looking up, she asked the question I'd been dreading. "Hey," she said, her voice small. "Is it true? Does Mom hate you?" Her question was so direct, so innocent, it knocked the wind out of me. The little tower wobbled as my hand shook. How do you explain a lifetime of complicated pain to an 8-year-old? I looked at her sweet, worried face, and I knew I couldn't give her the ugly, brutal truth, but I couldn't lie to her either. I took a deep breath. "It's complicated, Chloe," I started, choosing my words carefully. "I don't think she hates me. I think Mom was really, really sad for a long, long time, ever since she was a teenager. And sometimes, when grown-ups are that sad for that long, they forget how to be kind. They build walls around their hearts to protect themselves, but then they can't let any love out either. It's not your fault, and it's not my fault. It's just a sad thing that happened." She seemed to consider this for a moment, her brow furrowed. "So the walls are why she's not nice to you?" "Yeah," I said, a lump forming in my throat. "I think so." I pulled her into a hug, resting my chin on her hair. "But I'm not going anywhere, okay? And neither is Dad. We've got you." It felt like the most important promise I had ever made. Later that evening, after my siblings were asleep, I sat in the guest room, staring out the window at the quiet, suburban street. I thought about the girl my dad had described, the scared 16-year-old trapped and alone. I could feel a genuine sense of pity for her. I could mourn the life she never got to have, the choices she never got to make. I could see her as a victim. But then, I thought about the 32-year-old woman she became, the woman who had 15 years to go to therapy, to read a book, to learn, to grow, 15 years to stop blaming the child in front of her for the ghosts behind her. And when I thought of that woman, the pity vanished. The anger I felt in my room during that fight had faded too. It was all replaced by something else, something I was almost afraid to name. It was emptiness, a profound, cold, and quiet nothingness. I realized the attempted abortion was never the real wound. That was just the backstory, the origin of the poison. The real wound was the slow, methodical starvation of the next 15 years. It was a death by 1,000 paper cuts. And the scariest part? This cold, hollow feeling inside me now felt terrifyingly familiar. It was the same emptiness I saw in her eyes in the living room after she said those words. And in that moment of chilling self-awareness, I understood something. I couldn't have a big, screaming, tearful confrontation with her. I couldn't sit in a therapist's office and hash out our feelings. Why? Because to do that, you need feelings to be there. An emotional reckoning requires emotion. To her, I was a symbol of her trauma. To me, she was a void. Raging at a void is just a way to lose your own voice. I finally knew what I had to do. It wasn't about getting revenge. It wasn't about making her feel the pain she'd caused me. It was about making sure the disease of her emptiness didn't infect me permanently. It was about saving myself. The next day, after my dad took us home, I went to my room and sat down at my desk. I pulled out a fresh piece of paper and a pen. A conversation wouldn't work, but words on a page, they could. A letter wasn't an invitation to a dialogue. It was a closing statement. It was a way for me to say everything that needed to be said, on my own terms, without getting pulled into her orbit of resentment and regret. I finally picked up the pen. This letter wasn't for her, not really. It wasn't an olive branch. It wasn't an accusation. It was a mirror. I was going to calmly and clearly show her the world she had built for me, in my own words. The emptiness, the silence, the cold. And then I was going to walk away from it. Some might call it cruel or cold, unforgiving. Maybe it is. But after 15 years of starving for something that wasn't there, I've learned one thing. You can't get blood from a stone, and you can't save a drowning person by letting them pull you under. This was no longer about her or about us. This wasn't about forgiveness, it was about survival.